Gamaya tamaso ma jyotirgamaya mrityurma amritam gamaya om shanti shanti shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Namaste and good morning, everybody. Today, in our calendar, in the Hindu calendar, is a very auspicious day. It's called Mahalaya. So, it marks the beginning of the phase in which we worship the Divine Mother, Durga. So, the next week, Durga Puja is coming up, and we have a short puja here too on next Sunday. So, those of you who are free, please do come at 8:30. The puja will start. And of course, there will be a talk also on the Divine Mother at 11. And this also marks for us the birthday of Swami Akhandananda ji. You can see his picture there, one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. You know, this ashram was founded by Swami Vivekananda, the most well-known disciple of Sri Ramakrishna. But he had a number of other young men who became monks, disciples. We call them the Parshada, the direct monastic disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. There were some direct householder disciples and direct monastic disciples also. So Akhandananda ji was one of them, Swami Akhandananda. He never did come to the West. Actually, at one time, Swami Vivekananda requested him to come. But he was working for the poorest of the poor and for orphan children in one of the poorest areas of India, in Murshidabad in Bengal. And he said, I want to go on doing this work. So he never did come. But America went to him because, last week we talked about the life and teachings of Swami Abhedananda, who was here. And that we have a recording of Swami Abhedananda's voice, which we played here. Similarly, we actually have a video recording of Swami Akhandananda. Video would, of course, be old black and white film, very shaky, just for a few seconds. And that happened because America went to him. A group of Americans, American women, in the late 20s, early 30s, they traveled to India and they went to Belur Math, different places, and they visited Swami Akhandananda in his ashram in the remote, at that time very remote, in Murshidabad, Shargachi. And they captured him on film. So that film is a few seconds. It's available on YouTube if you look Swami Akhandananda recording. So you will see that. So today, our custom is that whenever there's the birthday of one of the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, we talk about their life and their teachings. So today we're going to talk about Swami Akhandananda, his life and his message. He was born Gangadhar Gangopadhyay, which is a mouthful even for a Bengali name. He was born in Calcutta. His father was a Brahmin priest. So he had this advantage of from childhood growing up surrounded by religion. His father was not just a priest but also a spiritual seeker. So he practiced yoga and tantra also. So it's something that the child was exposed to at a young age. And was very intelligent. He grew up, we read, he memorized the Gita and the Upanishads. I was thinking, a little boy did he memorize the whole Gita and the Upanishads? That would be pretty remarkable, actually. Maybe he memorized portions. But I wouldn't be surprised. I remember when I was a novice, a monk in training, more than 20 years ago at our main monastery in Belur, one of my brother monks, another young monk in training, he had memorized the whole Gita, 8 of the Upanishads, the Vivek Chudamani, the Ashtavakra Gita. And I asked him, how? How did he do it? And he said, well, in the ashram where I was before coming to the main monastery for further training, he had joined in another ashram. And he said, there they put me in charge of the book sales department, and nobody ever comes there. So I just spent my time, I read all the books there, and I memorized the important ones, all of them. As easy as that, I don't know. So maybe the little boy Gangadhar actually did memorize all of the Gita and the main Upanishads maybe. But he did learn Sanskrit, and we do know that people marveled when he was admitted into the English school, and he mastered the English alphabet, ABCD, at one go, which is a big thing for a little child to accomplish. But he was also a very compassionate boy. We read of how he gave away the shirt, literally the shirt off his back, to a friend of his whose shirt was torn. And he would regularly give away food from the kitchen to beggars secretly, because his mom would be furious otherwise, but to beggars who would invariably come to their house. He was a strong boy. And if you see the pictures, this is in his old age, but the other photographs of him, you can see he's a powerfully built man. And he lived near the Ganga, so he swam regularly, very austere from his childhood. He would eat strictly vegetarian food, which is a big thing for a Bengali, because Bengalis are fish eaters. He wouldn't. And not only vegetarian, at one point he said, I will only eat food cooked by, I'll cook my own food. I don't want anybody else to touch it. And he wouldn't put oil on his body, which brings quizzical expressions to people in America today. It's a bit like not putting moisturizer. And why wouldn't you do that? It's because one of the ideas of being a monk, a very spiritual person, a monk, for example, is a person who doesn't indulge in any kind of worldly luxury. So that includes putting oil on your body or even soap, which doesn't seem like a good idea, but that was the idea about being very austere. Again, I remember I thought that was what you were supposed to do. It is not, by the way. Monks are clean, so we are not particularly smelly. But I remember when I joined the order in the first few weeks, the place I became a monk in, that ashram, it's pretty dry and cold in winter. So it's in a place which is now called Jharkhand. At that time it was Bihar, the south of Bihar, in Deoghar. So in winter, it's very dry and cold. And I didn't put any oil. And I was walking around like that, and one of the monks said, "You look quite the farmer." In Bengali, that's a phrase. Chashar moton besh acho tumi. With cracked feet and all that. So, why are you like this? I said, "But we are not allowed to put oil, isn't that so?" He burst out laughing and he said, "You come with me." And he took me to a senior monk who was in charge of the oil department. So he had bottles of oil. And said, "Look at this young man. He thinks that you monks are not allowed to put oil on their bodies." And then that monk said, "How much oil do you want? I want you to take a bath in oil and come back." But anyway, that's what Gangadhar, the young boy, did. And he actually saw Sri Ramakrishna once as a kid in 1877. So he was born in 1864 on 30th September. 18, again, if you're wondering why the discrepancy in the dates, it's the Indian calendar versus the English calendar. So, in 1877, in the house of Dinanath Basu, he and his friend, they went, and Sri Ramakrishna was visiting. He saw Sri Ramakrishna. He saw Sri Ramakrishna in samadhi, in an ecstatic mood. That created a powerful impression on the young boy's mind. He was already interested in spiritual life. His mom noticed, Bama Sundari Devi, she noticed. And the immediate solution is marry him off. So he's going to become a monk if you're not careful. So she told him that we're going to arrange your marriage. And instead, look at the intelligence. Instead of saying no, fighting with his mom, he said, all right, I'll get married and then you can get another mother home who will help you with running the household. Indicating thereby to his mother that he would always look upon women as mother. And he was never going to enter into a marital relationship with anybody. And somehow his mother was intelligent enough to notice that, and she didn't pressurize him. Didn't tell him to, you have to get married or something. And actually he did run away to become a monk. There's a Sarvamangala temple, a temple of the Divine Mother in Kashipur in Calcutta. And there the young Gangadhar met a monk and then ran away with him to become a monk. And the family was desperately worried. They had sent out word to all the holy cities in the north. They knew he was fascinated with the Himalayas, Haridwar and Benares, and Vrindavan. They sent out word searching for him, but it turned out he hadn't gone very far. He had gone just about 60 miles to Burdwan, when that monk told him, you're too young to become a monk. You can become a monk, but later on, not now. Anyway, when he was 19, he really had his first meeting with Sri Ramakrishna. He went to Dakshineshwar, he met Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna, the first thing he asked him was, have you seen me earlier? And Gangadhar said, yes. When I was a little boy, I saw him. Now, you have to remember, Gangadhar, he was barely 19 and he looked much younger than his age. So he says, when I was a little boy, I saw him. When I was little, I saw him. And Sri Ramakrishna burst out laughing. To ask one of his disciples, Buddha Gopal, Swami Advaitananda, he says, listen to this little boy. What does he say? His childhood, he says. This child had a childhood, it seems. Anyway, Sri Ramakrishna recognized him as one of his close disciples, and told him to stay the day in Dakshineshwar, told him to go around the temple. So he gives a vivid description of his first visit to the temple garden of Dakshineshwar. He goes to the temple of the Divine Mother, Kali, and there are Shiva temples, the temples of Krishna and Radha and Krishna. And the evening there is Arati music, the Ganga flowing by. He gives a very beautiful description. And he says in the evening he went back to Sri Ramakrishna's room. There were no lights there. And there was incense and the dark smokiness. Sri Ramakrishna was just barely visible. He was sitting there on a cot, completely oblivious of the world. He had lost external awareness in samadhi. Anyhow, sometime later, Sri Ramakrishna came back to awareness of surroundings and told him that you stay the night and then you come again later on. So that's how Gangadhar started coming to Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna initiated him. Once he showed him how to meditate, the posture, and in his unique way, he would write a mantra. He said, Gangadhar said, Sri Ramakrishna wrote a mantra on my tongue and then asked me to meditate. He said that we means he and the other young boys who would come to Sri Ramakrishna, the close group of disciples, we would meditate invariably. Many of us would go into ecstasies, we'd go into plunge into deep samadhi. Some would burst out laughing, some would weep in devotion to God. Sri Ramakrishna asked him, do tears come to your eyes when you think about God? And he said yes, and that pleased Sri Ramakrishna very much. Gangadhar records how Sri Ramakrishna taught him to pray. He said, pray like a child. He said, just like a child, Sri Ramakrishna demonstrated. He says, he threw his hands out like a little boy crying to his mother. He says, oh mother dear, I do not want anything in this world. Give me knowledge, give me devotion, jnana and bhakti. I want only to have your vision, and I do not want anything else. And he wept so profusely, tears came down his cheeks and to his chest. And then he went into deep samadhi. This impressed Gangadhar so much, the sheer vibration of the place. Another time, Sri Ramakrishna took him to the temple of the Divine Mother, Kali. And you know the iconography, that Kali is standing on top and Shiva is lying down prone on the ground, and Kali, one of her feet is on the chest of Shiva, and so on. And Sri Ramakrishna points out to Gangadhar. By the way, Gangadhar is a name of Shiva. So to Gangadhar, look, the living Shiva. It's an image. And Gangadhar said, we normally see it as an image, but I felt just by the sheer force of his presence, the sheer force of his words, I felt that this was a living divine presence there. Such was the power that Sri Ramakrishna exerted. He could infuse the divine vision into anybody he wanted to. And when they came back from the temple, Gangadhar records how Sri Ramakrishna was reeling as if drunk, intoxicated, in divine joy, in a kind of divine madness. He says these are things you could never ever forget in your life, never to be repeated, never to be seen anywhere else, never ever forget in all your life. So this is how the days passed in Dakshineshwar, days of teaching. Not formal classes, certainly not lectures like this. Just, Sri Ramakrishna would tell them something, show them something, give them instructions. For example, a beggar came, and Sri Ramakrishna told Gangadhar, there's money there, go and give the beggar. So he took out the money from that place and gave the beggar. And then Sri Ramakrishna said, be sure to wash your hands. Driving into in young boy's mind that somehow wealth, money, handling money is dirty. So he washed his hands, but you see Gangadhar later on, wandering for 14 long years, he wandered the length and breadth of India, especially in the high Himalayas, up to Tibet, without ever touching money. I'm reminded of Swami Ranganathananda ji, the 13th president of our order. He was a worldwide lecturer in Vedanta. He traveled 60 countries in this day and age, by plane of course, without ever touching money. He depended on people to arrange these tours for him. But he did get into trouble sometimes. In those days, before mobile phones and all, sometimes there was a missed connection or something. Nobody turned up at the airport, and so he has no money to eat or take a taxi or anything like that. Anyway, and at that time, Gangadhar made friends with the other young boys who would become the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. Naren, who became Vivekananda, Rakhal, who became Brahmananda, Kali, who became Avedananda. So all of them he met, and they became fast friends at that time. So many instances of how Sri Ramakrishna taught these young boys. Oh, one very important teaching which comes to us especially through Swami Akhandananda, through Gangadhar. Once, Sri Ramakrishna told Gangadhar that he who is your Ishta is your Atma. Your Atma and the Ishta Devata are one and the same. And the vision of the Ishta Devata is the same as the realization of the self, Atma Jnana. Now this is very important because we seem to have two parallel rivers of spiritual instruction here. One is a devotional mystical path. So there is God, and have devotion to God, pray to God, and then the Guru initiates you, gives you a Ishta mantra. Ishta means the chosen form of God. So in Hinduism, it's a supermarket. I remember reading, and this is an important teaching for this day and age. Unfortunately so, I would say, because I remember reading just a couple of weeks ago, the Pope attended an important world conference on world religions. So he attended that. And a senior archbishop in the Vatican, conservative, he criticized the Pope by saying that the Pope shouldn't do this. Why? Because when you attend a conference of world religious leaders, you're giving the impression that there are many true religions. But we all know there's only one true religion, which is the Catholic, no, not all of Christianity, only the Roman Catholic Christian Church. That's the one true religion. Everything else is false. So how, if you, now that is a kind of fanaticism that still remains, narrowness. And so that is one of the things that we can learn from classical Hinduism, that one can have intense devotion and loyalty to one religious ideal and consider all other religious ideals to be equally true. That's your way of reaching God. This is my way of reaching God. So this my way of reaching God and your way of reaching God, in Hinduism this is called Ishta. Ishta literally means the chosen, the desired one. So in my way I understand that you love Christ, I love Krishna, and I know both are the same reality ultimately. So there is this mystical teaching of the Ishta mantra and the form of God in which you will approach God. The Guru initiates you. It's a path of devotion, worship, surrender, service, and mantra repetition and meditation, japa and dhyana. What will it lead to? It will lead to a vision of God in the form you are practicing, that you are seeking. And so that's a kind of culmination of that path. And there's something more to it after that also. And there is another stream of spiritual instruction which you hear from, and more from me, I think, is that put God aside for the time being. Look at your own experience of yourself. Here is the body, here is the mind, and who am I? Am I the body? Am I the mind? Or am I the awareness, the witness consciousness of this body-mind? An inquiry into our own experience, into the self. What will this lead to? It will lead to a realization that we are not just the body. We are not even minds embodied. We are not just persons. We are this unlimited awareness with an overlay of mind and body, truly. The person is still there. And from this perspective of this unlimited awareness, you are free from samsara. Because this unlimited awareness which we are, is free from the limitations of samsara. Limitations of samsara sounds a little philosophical. What it means is, bodies are born and they die. Minds undergo ups and downs. Continuous stream of physical change and mental change. That's a body, that's a mind. But beyond this, unaffected by the ups and downs of the world, of the body, ever fulfilled, not requiring anything in the world, is this unlimited consciousness. You realize that. Chidananda Rupa Shivoham. I am of the nature of bliss. I am of the nature of consciousness. I am Shiva. Or Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. So now these are two parallel streams of spiritual instruction, you see. And then one might have this confusion, this question. How do I relate these two? And which one is mine? Or are both? And are they leading me in different directions? They feel different. They feel different. Here Sri Ramakrishna reconciles these two very important teachings, very central teaching. He says, if you follow the path of devotion to God and meditation on God and repetition of a mantra and meditation and a mystical realization, vision of God, that is also the same thing as an inquiry into your experience and realizing that you are the Atman or Brahman. How is it the same thing? There is a lot of philosophy behind it, but for our purposes, it's important to know these are not different paths. They feel different. The practices are different. The philosophies behind it are different. But they lead you to the experience of the same reality. And both will lead you to freedom from samsara. Which one should we follow? One or both? Either this one or that one or both of them. There's no problem at all. In Bengali, the exact words Sri Ramakrishna used to teach Akhandananda ji was Jejar Ishto Shetar Atma. Whoever is your Ishta Devata, that is your Atman, your real nature, your real self. So the answer, the search for God and the quest, who am I, they lead to the same answer. A Sufi put it very well. He said that when I search for Allah, I found myself. When I was searching for myself, I found Allah. It is exactly the same teaching. Meister Eckhart, the great Catholic mystic and theologian, not Eckhart Tolle, power of man. No, long before that, 500 years before that, 600 years, German mystic. So he was a Catholic Christian, and he said, the ground of God and the ground of my soul are one and the same ground. That means that what God is really and what I am really are one and the same reality. Exactly the same teaching. I heard it from Swami Nirmuktanandaji. He was Upen Maharaj. He was nearly 100 years old when I asked him. He had served Swami Akhandananda. He had seen Swami Akhandananda and served him. And he had heard these teachings from him directly. And I asked him once, I was a novice, and I asked him, Swami, we have a mantra and our gurus have told us this is our Ishta Devata. Here we have devotion and we meditate. And at the same time, I'm fascinated by Vedanta, Upanishads, Gita, the inquiry into who am I. How do I bring these two together? And then he said to me, these exact words, he said to me, Shononi, haven't you heard? Jejar Ishto Shetar Atma. Whoever or whatever is your Ishta Devata, that is your Atman. And then Sri Ramakrishna adds, Ishto Darshan, the darshan, the mystical experience of Ishta Devata, is the same as Atma Jnana, realization of the self. So it's a great source of comfort. You set your minds at ease. Whichever is your preferred mode of sadhana, spiritual practice, you are not missing out. What do you call it? FOMO. Fear of missing out. I am missing out on something. Somebody told me that the two dominant ideologies in Silicon Valley are FOMO and YOLO. Fear of missing out and you live only once. And then I said, to that Swami, I said, then Swami Akhandananda must have told you this. He said, yes, but it is Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. And you can find it in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. He told Akhandanandaji. When Sri Ramakrishna passed in 1886, the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, they banded together, they became monks, and they formally performed what is called the Viraja Homa, the ritual by which one becomes a monk. And Gangadhar became Swami Akhandananda. Now started a long period of solitary travel and spiritual practice across the length and breadth of India, especially the north to the Himalayas. He had always been fascinated with the Himalayas. And he set off. When he was setting off on his journey, his father bought him a train ticket and blessed him. And his father saw him off at the train station and said, my boy, I have realized the world is impermanent. God alone is real. I pray heartily that may you find God in this very life. May the goal of your life be fulfilled. May you reach it. So he went off different places. In Bodh Gaya, he went and met a great yogi, Gambhir Nath, of the Nath Sampradaya. And nowadays you know of Yogi Adityanath, the Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh. But he is actually also a genuine monk and a member of the Nath Sampradaya and the temple, the Gorakhnath temple. He is the head monk of that, or was. And that lineage, one of the greatest and illumined teachers of that lineage in recent times was Gambhir Nath. And Akhandananda, having heard of Gambhir Nath, went up to that mountain. It's called Brahmayoni Parvat. There's a mountain in which Gambhir Nath used to stay. And Gambhir Nath immediately recognized this young yogi had great spiritual potential. And he said, you stay with me, my child. I'll teach you and you will attain everything. You'll attain full enlightenment under my guidance. But Akhandananda said, when my teacher, Sri Ramakrishna, used to say that one must see the Himalayas and the ocean to get an idea about the infinitude of God. So I want to see the Himalayas. And off he went. He went to Benares, the holy city, and there he met Trailanga Swami to take his blessings. Trailanga Swami, was one of the legendary yogis of Benares. He lived to 280 years, more or less well documented. Recently, I was approached by a television series It's in the History Channel. What was it called? Mysteries, I think. Anybody remembers now? So they wanted to do an episode on yogis of India. And the whole point is not God realization or enlightenment or meditation. No, how do you live long? So they said, but the way they approached me was interesting. They said, do you want to be on a show with William Shatner? I said, yes, Captain Kirk. It's good you recognize it, because we grew up as kids, and the only English TV series, in American TV series on Indian TV in those days when we were kids, only two were there. One was Star Trek, the original series with Captain Kirk, and the other was I Love Lucy. So we grew up with Captain Kirk. And I said, I'm going to be on TV with Captain Kirk. I never did get to meet him, though. He hosts the show, so he's on the show, but I'm one of the people who come on, on the show. So who is a yogi? Can you give us an example of a long-lived yogi? And we all know, at least Indians know, that it's immediately the name that comes to mind in modern times and documented. Otherwise, in old texts, you will find any number of yogis who all lived 10,000 years. No, not 1 year more or less. Which basically means they lived a long time. But well documented, if you want some documentation, then Trailanga Swami comes to mind. And more or less 280 years, there is kind of documentation of his continuous living, most of his life. Early life was in Andhra, what is called Andhra Pradesh now, actually Telangana now. And he came to Banaras and lived the rest of the centuries. So Sri Ramakrishna met him. And there is a place where he lived. It's a small little, like a cottage on the bank of the Ganga in Banaras. If you go there, there's a painting of him talking to Sri Ramakrishna. Not a photograph, it's a painting. And it shows Sri Ramakrishna asked him, 2 or 1? Just because Trailanga Swami was not speaking at that time. He was silent. So Sri Ramakrishna used sign language, 2 or 1. And Trailanga, he shows 2, and Trailanga Swami shows 1. I got into trouble once. I was in the monastery once, and we were sitting down for our night food, and I was telling this story to another monk near me. And I said, Sri Ramakrishna said 2 or 1, and Trailanga Swami said 1. At that time, they were serving the chapatis. And the person, and they go fast, and you have to quickly say how many you want. And I said, Sri Ramakrishna said 1, and I saw they gave 1 chapati, and they moved on before I could protest. Then he went to meet Swami Bhaskarananda Saraswati. He was a great spiritual master at that time. Swami Vivekananda met him, the Holy Mother, Ma Sharada met him, Sri Ramakrishna also met him, I think. He was a great non-dualist, with a very austere Swami, elderly, not as old as Trailanga Swami. I'm sure Trailanga Swami would have considered him a kid, but very elderly and very respected Swami, and a master of non-dual Vedanta. He was very known for his scholarship in the Upanishads, in the Shankara's commentary, and he had written his own, they're still available now, his own commentaries, set of simplified commentaries on the Upanishads. A non-dualist. And Bhaskarananji saw him and again recognized the potential in this young boy, this young monk Akhandananda, and said, you stay with me, I will teach you the Upanishads, I'll teach you Advaita Vedanta, all the texts. And Akhandananda said to him, that power of sight by which you are asking me to read the books, I want to bless me that I may be able to turn that inwards and realize the Atman within. This is a reference to the Kathopanishad. Paranchi khani vyatrinat swayambhu tasmat param pashyati nantaratman. What it means is, the Lord has created us all in such a way we continuously flow outwards into the world. We are busy with seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, loving, fighting, desiring, hating. And we never ever look inwards into who or what we are. And then it goes on to say, Kaschid dhira avritta chakshu pratyagatmanam aikshat amritatvam icchan. It says it's only a rare spiritual seeker desiring immortality, looks inwards. Avritta literally means covering the eyes or shutting up the external vision. Looks inwards and realizes the inner self, that who am I? So Akhandananda sort of paraphrased this and said, that sight by which you are asking me to study the books, bless me so that it may turn inwards and I may realize the self within. And Bhaskarananda was actually very, very pleased with him. And he said, I see that you are a real yogi, and he blessed him. Bhaskarananda is an interesting connection, American connection. Mark Twain, at that time, so he had landed in some financial difficulties. So he was offered a way out that if you go on a world tour and write a travel diary, like go and give lectures and write a series of essays, they offered him a lot of money, I think a newspaper. So he and his family, they set out for a world tour. The name of the book, which was published later, the collection of his writings, is called Following the Equator. And he landed up in India. And his wife says that most of the time, I'm afraid he was miserable, except when he was in India. 2 or 3 months he lived in India, and he was very happy all throughout, joyous. And one of the high points was when he visited the holy city of Benares, and at that time the British administration there was such a distinguished visitor, the famous American writer Mark Twain. So they took him to meet the well-known Hindu yogi, Bhaskarananda, none other than this same Bhaskarananda. And Mark Twain, of course, his ironic humor, so he makes fun of everything, but very gently and very sweetly. So he says, I met him, and his name, he says it was 1008 times Shri. From India, you will know, Shri, 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 1008 times. Far more than Shri, Shri, Ravi Shankar, So 1008 times Shri, 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 Shri. Paramamsa Parivrajaka Acharya Brahmanishta Srimat Swami Bhaskarananda Saraswati. And Mark Twain writes, that's far longer, that much longer than the longest German word I know. And then he goes and meets the Swami, and he says, and he's given a beautiful description of the old monk. He says, he has got this most intellectual face and a very kindly pair of eyes, and like a very loving presence he has got. And so Swami Bhaskarananda Saraswati presented Mark Twain. He was told that this is a famous visitor from a far-off land and he's a very great writer. So Swami Bhaskarananda Saraswati presented him with a set of his own commentaries on the Upanishads, which Mark Twain couldn't read, of course, because it was all in Sanskrit. But Mark Twain, not to be outdone, he presented the Swami with a copy of Huckleberry Finn, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And then he writes, I gave it to him. I know it might not do him much good, but I also know it won't do him much harm either. And it might afford him a few moments of leisure in between his meditations on the absolute reality. However, it influenced him. There's a mysterious chapter, and he writes sort of autobiographically at the end of his life, and the last chapter in that book, not the Following the Equator, much later book, towards the end of his life. The last thing he writes, the world is but a dream. As in a dream, we think that the world is real. When we awaken from the dream, we realize it was a dream and none of that ever existed. Similarly, these are but dreams. We go from dream to dream. Which is very much like the Mandukya Upanishad, Mandukya Karika, So the Bhaskarananda Saraswati blessed him, Akhandanandaji. And then Akhandanandaji goes on to towards the north to the Himalayas. He goes to Haridwar. There is the Chandi Parvat. Those who have gone to Haridwar, there is a temple of the Divine Mother, Chandi. And so he climbed that hill. Nowadays, you don't have to climb. Nowadays, I hear there is a ropeway which takes you up there. So he climbed up the hill, and there was a great tantric there, Kamraj. And this Kamraj was a worship of the Divine Mother. And he said to Akhandanandaji that even he recognized, I think everybody's out to make a disciple of him, said, I will give you the vision of the Divine Mother, come and stay with me. And Akhandananda said that I want that knowledge which takes one beyond sorrow. And then Kamraj, very touchingly, he said, you want self-knowledge, Atma-Jnana, Vedantic knowledge. You don't want to see my Divine Mother. He said it so poignantly that Akhandananda never forgot that, the deep love and devotion for God as mother. Anyway, Akhandananda went on into the high Himalayas. He had many adventures there. For example, a couple I'll mention. Both involved tigers, so that's interesting. So in Rishikesh, in those days, monks used to live in little cottages made of twigs and branches. They would make it themselves, and leaves. And obviously very flimsy. So for a tiger, it's no problem. There's a delicious monk inside, so you can make a dinner of it. I'm sure monks were not particularly delicious. They were underfed and skinny. So anyhow, and there were always these stories of monks being captured or eaten by tigers. So Akhandananda heard of a story which he later told Vivekananda, and Vivekananda told it a number of times here in the West. So Akhandananda heard of a monk who had been caught by a tiger and they dragged off into the forest to be eaten, and the other monks, till they could hear no longer, they kept on hearing that monk chanting loudly, Soham, Soham, I am he, that means I am Shiva, literally in the jaws of death. When the tiger is dragging you off to be eaten up, and he still says, I am that pure consciousness. This is at the level of the body. The same pure consciousness is the tiger and the prey of the tiger. And he said this to Vivekananda, and Vivekananda told this story a number of times here in the West. Akhandananda himself had a run-in with a tiger. Once in the high Himalayas, in a little village, he took refuge at night. And at night he said there's an enclosure where the people were taking refuge with the cattle. And the cattle is what pulls the tiger, So they could hear a tiger roaring outside, pacing outside in the forests nearby and growling and roaring. Akhandananda said all the people were scared and shivering. The cows were all huddled together. Then suddenly he thought, I'm a monk. Why should I be afraid? And he walked out to the horror of the people in that enclosure. He opened the door and he walked out into the forest in the night. And he says, I just sat down in a corner under a tree and meditated throughout the night. That tells you something about the quality of his mind, because I can tell you from personal experience, some of you may know, that in a deep forest, it's not so easy to meditate. You might think it's calm and peaceful, so nice. No, it is not really calm. Even in daylight, there are all sorts of sounds and movements in the forest, and you can't see what's going on. So you're sitting quietly and meditating in the forest, you feel quite like the Buddha, and a single twig snaps. And you don't know what's out there. It could be nothing, could be just a deer. And that's probably what it was. But it could also be a leopard or a bear. I remember once I went up into forests above our ashram in Mayavati, and the monks told me that, just be careful, there are bears and there are leopards. The big tigers are gone. That's the area in which the famous hunter Jim Corbett, we have read the stories of tiger hunting Jim Corbett. That's the area in Champavat where he hunted those tigers. Unfortunately, the big cats are gone, but still, the leopards are there. The Royal Bengal tigers are not there anymore, but leopards are definitely there. Even Royal Bengal tiger might be there. One or two of our monks I've seen years ago. So a monk told me that if you be careful, there are bears and there are leopards. But the piece of advice, if a bear chases you, don't run down the mountain path. Just run straight down the mountain. The bears don't want to go there. They tumble. So they don't want to run straight down the mountain. And when I looked at how steep it was, I thought the bears are pretty wise. Even I'll take my chances running down the mountain path, not straight down the mountain. Akhandananda calmly went and sat under a tree, and all night long, with the tiger roaring somewhere in the background, he meditated. He went even further up into the icy wastelands which take you to the Tibetan plateau. So further north. And in those days that was very difficult because Tibet at that time was literally cut off from both China in the north and India in the south. So he penetrated into those icy plateaus. He had many adventures. For example, once he fainted on an ice field. Luckily there was a big Tibetan monastery nearby, and the lamas came and rescued him. And they looked at him and they said, You are a brahmachari, a celibate monk from your childhood. We know these things and we can tell by looking at you. And they respected him greatly for that. And then he had a little photograph of Sri Ramakrishna. This photograph, a smaller version of it. It was not at all well known in those days. So the Tibetans had never even seen this. And they saw this photograph and he said, whose photograph is this? This person has the expression of a Buddha. So we don't know what's an expression of a Buddha. We see that, well, maybe, but they know. They said, yes, this is the expression of a Buddha. Who is this person? Later, another time in Tibet, he met a group of gypsies, wandering people, not even monks, gypsies or wandering people. And the chief of the gypsies, when he saw the picture of Sri Ramakrishna with Akhandananda, he touched it and went into samadhi. And later he told Akhandananda, I don't know who this person is, but he must be a Buddha. And just by touching the picture, I've never had this experience just by touching. He was a spiritually advanced person. But just by touching this picture, I went to him and please tell me about him. Who is this person? And he wanted to take the picture away. When he comes back to India, the police, at that time you have to remember it was the British administration. So the British police caught hold of him and they thought he was a spy from Tibet. And then finally he convinced them that he was actually genuinely a monk, a Hindu monk. So they switched. They said that in that case, you have been to Tibet and you've been to Lhasa and you know the customs and language. Would you want to be our consul general to Tibet? So like you have the consul general of India here. So they offered Akhandananda the job that to be the British consul general to Tibet. Of course, he refused. He came back to the plains. He traveled. Interesting incident was in Delhi. Once he was sitting in a park in New Delhi, in the capital, and those years it had still not become the capital. Up to 1911, Calcutta was the capital. So he was sitting in a park, very hungry, hadn't eaten. Remember, he had this vow of not carrying money. And he thought that if somebody comes and offers me food, then only I will eat. I will not even... A monk is allowed to beg for food. He said, I won't even do that. Let me see if this works. In this place, I'll just sit here, nobody knows me. Somebody should come and offer me food. And he said, if a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna comes here and offers me food, then I will eat. It's a very difficult condition to set in those days and in Delhi, that too, not in Calcutta. And this gentleman came, a Marwadi businessman, came and sat next to him and he said, you look like a good monk and do you need money? He offered him some money. And Akhandananda said, no, I don't take money. Then that gentleman was impressed. He said, oh, that's so interesting. The last monk whom I met who had completely renounced all money was this wonderful mystic on the bank of Ganga called Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. He said, how do you know him? And the Marwari gentleman introduced himself. He says, I am Lakshmi Narayan. So in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, you'll find Lakshmi Narayan Marwari, who was a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, who had at one time offered him 10,000 rupees, which is an enormous sum in those days. Sri Ramakrishna refused immediately. But then he's made a little provision, an escape clause. He said, you can offer it to her, and she takes care of all the food and everything, so she may be able to use the money. So Lakshmi Narayan Marwari goes to her and to Ma Sharada and says, you can keep this money and use it for the service. It's not, you don't have to take it. You can use it for the service of Sri Ramakrishna, the devotees who come to. And she says, and look at her intelligence and subtle understanding. She says, look, my accepting is as good as his accepting it, something. And since he has refused, I cannot take the money also. That also is a message to us that if you offer it to Sri Ramakrishna, if you offer it to the Holy Mother, it's one and the same thing. So Lakshmi Narayan was very impressed, and then he invited Akhandananda, why don't you come to my house? You don't have to take the money, but come to my house and at least eat something. And literally it came out to be true. A disciple of Sri Ramakrishna in that far-off place comes to the same park and the same bench and calls him to home to give him a hearty meal. Then in his wanderings, Akhandananda went to Gujarat, and this is important. In a place in Gujarat, a very wealthy gentleman, Shankar Seth, became very enamored of Akhandananda and invited him to stay at home, started learning Vedanta from him. and became so interested when he heard about Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda and all of that. By that time, Vivekananda had already become known here. He was already here in the West. So he said, I want to give this large sum of money and start an ashram here and a temple to Sri Ramakrishna and everything. That made his relatives furious because they thought we will inherit uncle's money, his nephews basically. They had two nephews. They thought we'll inherit his money. And here is this, who knows who he is, this wandering monk, and now he has interested uncle in his project. So they decided to poison him, Akhandananda. They offered him coffee and laced with poison. And Akhandananda drank that and he became terribly ill. And there was a great physician. So this is why I'm telling the story. There's a great physician nearby in that area, Jhandu Bhatt. Those who are from India, have you heard Jhandu Balm? Same person, the person who invented that. It's something that's very well known to the length and breadth of India, even today. So he was a great Ayurvedic physician. And he took Akhandananda into his own house. Sometimes he would treat patients, take them to his own house and treat them. And Akhandananda learned and was inspired by Jhandu Bhatt because he saw, here is this person, a doctor who treats patients, and all his life is dedicated to the service of suffering humanity. He would see Jhandu Bhatt treating as many people as he could without taking any money from them. Anybody who couldn't afford to pay was fine. He would treat them. And Jhandu Bhatt's daily prayer impressed Akhandananda so much. So this doctor, Jhandu Bhatt, he would pray to God, Oh Lord, I don't want heaven, I don't want pleasures in this world, I don't want wealth, I don't even want liberation, moksha. All I pray for is, let the sufferings of all sentient beings cease. All I pray for is, may I enter into the hearts of those who are suffering and feel their suffering. That's all I want. That's all I pray for. Akhandananda was so touched by this. And later on you'll see how he translated it into action. He was a straight talker. He got into trouble sometimes. Once, he went to the kingdom of Khetri, small kingdom, and the king was a devotee of Swami Vivekananda, the king of Khetri, Raja of Khetri. And the palace is now an ashram now. Anyhow, Akhandananda observed that the king used to get up late in the morning, and he straight up told the king that those who get up late in the morning, they cannot prosper in this worldly life or in spiritual life. And Akhandananda himself tells the story. So look at the transformation in the king. The next day, early in the morning, before I woke up, when I opened my eyes, I saw the king standing in front of my bed and smiling. And he says, from that day onwards, the king regularly got up. He was up long before I got up. And Akhandananda would get up long before sunrise. And he said, I would see the king pacing up and down sometimes. Sometimes I would see the light in the library on and he would be studying there. He came back to the monastery in Calcutta. Swami Vivekananda had returned from the United States and he was developing the monastery, and a new generation of monks were coming in. Now, Swami Vivekananda and Akhandananda had a very beautiful relationship. Swami Vivekananda, among all the other direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, especially loved Akhandananda more than anybody else. And there were some reasons for that, but one was, of course, Swami Akhandananda was the first to wholeheartedly accept Swami Vivekananda's teachings about service of humanity. And we'll see how he translated that into practice. But this is humorous also. So, for example, once Swami Vivekananda was talking about some travels they had, Akhandananda and Vivekananda and others in the Himalayas. And wherever he missed a detail, Akhandananda would pipe in and say, no, it was not like this, it was like this. This was here and not there. This was this date, not that date. And Swami Vivekananda, if you're telling a story, it's very irritating if somebody keeps correcting you. So Swami Vivekananda snapped at him, oh, do keep quiet, close your eyes and meditate, keep shut. And so Akhandananda immediately sat and went into meditation. And Swami Vivekananda was telling a story about some river in the mountains where they saw a fish. A fish is somewhat rare in mountain rivers. So, and it was a big fish. And he was trying to explain how big that fish was and how amazing it was. And then he looked at Akhandananda, how big was the fish? And Akhandananda, of course, has been commanded to meditate. So he was sitting like this and he did. Um, Another time, they had a long discussion on in reincarnation. When a person dies and because of past karma, you're reborn in another life, in another body. How does that happen? Whether that happens at all or not. Long debate among the brother monks. It went on till 2 a.m. in the morning. So they all went to bed at 2 a.m. after this long debate. Now the rule in the monastery is you have to get up before 4 a.m. Actually, you get up at 3:40 a.m. At 3:40 a.m., Swami Vivekananda told Akhandananda, woke him up. Hey, get up, ring the bell, wake these fellows up. Akhandananda said, they just went to sleep at 2 a.m. It's not even 2 hours. And Swami Vivekananda said, it's a monastery. Have we made a monastery for people, these fellows, to come and snore? No, they have to follow the routine. Go and wake them up. So Akhandananda said, I went along ringing the bell to wake people up. And they started yelling at me and cursing me, and then they saw Vivekananda standing behind me, and they kept quiet and quietly went to the shrine to meditate. Back to the routine again. So at one point, Akhandananda had decided, well, all is fine, things are coming up nicely, and I loved my time in the Himalayas, in Tibet, so I'll just go back there and spend the rest of my life. Till my death, I'll live in the mountains now, from now on. Just before going, let me see one or two important places. So there was this place associated with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Navadvip, go there, and one or two important places in Bengal. And then I'll go away to Tibet, and I'll never come back again. And then he goes there, and a big famine was raging at that time. He saw the poor farmers and the skinny cattle and people emaciated. He goes to this, and this place, Murshidabad. There's a large Muslim population there, even today. So he goes there, and near a shop, he sees this skinny little girl. She was a Muslim girl, about 14 years old. She had a broken pot in her hand. She was standing and weeping. And he asked her, what's wrong? And she said, we are very poor, sir. She said, father, Baba in Bengali. So Baba is father. We are very poor, father, and we have only this one pot for fetching water. And I was going to the river to fetch water, and the pot broke. The bottom fell out. And I'm very afraid now. When I go back, my mother is going to beat me. So she's crying in fear. And Akhandananda was so moved and touched that whatever little money, had money at that time, I think. So he took her to a shop, bought her a pot, and with some of the money he bought her mudi, which is puffed rice, to eat. And before he could get the change from the shopkeeper, he was surrounded by a crowd of hungry children, all clamoring for food. So he immediately spent that money to feed the children, and then he looked around and he saw that the condition of the people there was terrible. And so at night, and then this person runs up to him and says, Baba, you have to come. Gaya Vaishnavi is dying. And this is an elderly lady living in the neighborhood. And so he went to that house. She was a widow, nobody to take care of her, elderly. And she had diarrhea, she was covered in filth, and she was dying. So he cleaned her up as best as he could. He got her food. He went and begged for a piece of cloth for her. And this old lady was so touched, and she said that none of the neighbors had helped. And she said, my child, you must have been my son in a past birth. And Akhandananda said, why in the past birth, mother? I am your son in this birth. Then he went and met some people in the locality. What could be done? That night, he wept and he slept. When he went to sleep, he prayed to Sri Ramakrishna. And, he had made up his mind that next morning I'm going to sneak out and leave this place. It breaks my heart. I can't do anything. These people are suffering. I'll just go away and never come back again. Sri Ramakrishna appears to him in a dream. 3 times he hears this voice, don't go, stay here. A great work will be done through you. And he's like, what can I do? I'm a monk, I have no money at all. And then who's going to listen to me? And Sri Ramakrishna tells him in that voice, in that vision, that stay, everything will happen. So that place, this place called Bhapta, Mahula. So there he starts the first relief activity of the Ramakrishna order. He collects some people, persuades some rich people in the neighborhood to give money, purchases food, distributes it among the starving people, and starts an action program to help, to give food to the starving. And then the local administration, the district judge and the magistrate, both British officers, they come forward to help. He writes to Swami Vivekananda for help, and Swami Vivekananda immediately praises him and sends 2 monks to help him, and other people, they swing into action to collect money to send him. And so the first relief activity of the Ramakrishna order, more than 100 years in India and in Bangladesh, the Ramakrishna order is known for relief activities, giving food to the hungry in times of famine, in times of flood, disaster relief. All of this, it's been going on for more than 100 years now. It starts with Swami Akhandananda. And Swami Vivekananda was so very happy. One of the most glorious letters he has written. He writes to Akhandananda that I'm so happy to hear what you are doing. Work, 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 work unto death. Love is the one thing that is needed. Nothing else counts. He says, neither learning, nor books, nor your meditation, not even illumination and enlightenment. It is love that counts. It is the heart that counts. And through this love, and here he says, through this love will come bhakti. We think bhakti is love. We always say the path of love, we mean love of God. Vivekananda does not mean that. He says just this human love. And to love unconditionally. Not because just these people are my husband, wife, children, grandchildren, just these, I love these, that's true. And that's good. But expand that outwards. People who are nothing to you, and yet you have the same love for them unconditionally. He says, through this love will come everything. Through this love, he says, through this love will come bhakti, that is the love of God. And then he says, through this love will come, he says, siddhi, that means all spiritual powers, they will come through love. All help. He says, money does not matter, money will drop from heaven. All you need is this love. And then he says, Vivekananda, through this love will come ultimately emancipation, illumination and freedom, moksha, jnana, brahma jnana and freedom. Through this love it will come. One of the great supporters of Akhandanandaji, when he was traveling in Banaras, he had met Pramoda Das Mitra, a very rich landlord, Bengali gentleman who had settled in Banaras, a great scholar. In fact, he had taken Akhandananda to meet Bhaskarananda Swami, great Sanskrit scholar. He had taught Akhandananda to chant the Upanishads and the Gita and all properly. Bengalis have a heavy accent, so he corrected it. And so he supported Akhandananda. But when Akhandananda started this activity, Pramodadas Mitra criticized him. You are monks. You are supposed to meditate and study the scriptures and teach people. Leave these to the government or whoever, the society. Feeding the hungry or taking care of the sick and ill and dying, that's not your job. Akhandananda writes back to his friend and supporter and mentor. He writes back a fiery letter. He says, Brahma Jnana, you are already Brahman. What else is to be realized? Doesn't your Vedanta say that? Isn't this what you have taught me? And this very Brahman, you have to keep on talking about Brahman, Atman, God. I see that God, my God the starving, my God the ill, the sick, the poor. This is the God I shall serve and worship. If it sends me to hell, I care not. And he wrote a fiery letter back to Pramoda Das Mitra. So he sets up this ashram in Sargachi. People had died and the children were orphans. He collected them from their little kids whose parents, and it didn't matter whether the parents were Hindu, Muslim, many of the kids were Muslims. So he brought them together in the ashram and he took care of them. The descriptions, literally the service of God in man. There's a description of Akhandanandaji later in his old age, bathing a little child, little boy, pouring in the Indian style, pouring water on his head and chanting the Purusha Sukta. Sahasra Shirasa Purusha, with the one consciousness with 1,000 heads and 1,000 hands and 1,000 feet. This is the God present in everywhere. Incredible what he developed started there. A small ashram came up during his time. His worship was simple. He had that same little picture of Sri Ramakrishna, which the Tibetan gypsy on the icy plateau of Tibet had touched and gone into samadhi. That little picture he would keep, offer some flowers and pray heartfully to Sri Ramakrishna. Help these poor people. Show me a way to help them. And help did come. The famine passed, but the ashram grew, the orphanage grew, and Akhandananda devoted the rest of his life to the service of God in all human beings. There's a book, From Holy Wanderings in the Himalayas to the Service of God in Man. What a tremendous transformation. This monk who was completely cut off. He writes that you will not recognize me now. In old age, he's talking to people. You will not recognize me now. I was an entirely different person in those days. I would not want to talk to people. I would just want to be myself in utter and this, the magnificent solitude of the towering mountains and glaciers. I was perfectly happy there. And here now, just the opposite. In the midst of squalor and poverty, day and night he's engaged. Swami Vivekananda makes a very interesting remark. He says to some of the people around him, see how Akhandananda, so Gangadhar, he used to call him Ganges. See how Ganges is working without any fear of death. He is working day and night. Then the gentlemen who were around him said, oh, it must take a lot of spiritual power to work like that for poor and suffering. Then Swami Vivekananda says something very insightful. It's a great lesson to all of us. He says, yes, it takes spiritual power to work like that for others, but working like that for others develops your spiritual powers. Just start, have a heart, follow your heart, do something for people, that develops your spiritual powers. One of the charismatic and powerful people I've met recently, a young man who, like Akhandananda, he has started this orphanage in Calcutta, just outside Calcutta. And his name is Vinayak. So I met him. It's a huge thing now. There are more than 5,000 children. Not all of them orphans, maybe one parent, or maybe parents have no way of looking after them. 5,000 children. And he says that I am their parent. It's not like a typical orphanage or like a reform home or like a care, child services care here. Not like that. He says, I am their father and mother. From the time they come to me till the time they grow up and get a job or get married and go away, till that time, I am responsible for everything. For their physical development, for their education, for their medical care, their housing, their emotional needs, their moral, spiritual needs, everything I will take care. So that's the model he has developed. So I asked him, how did you start like this? And he says, he's a brilliant young man, the kind of thing which is most popular in India now. You have to be an IIT engineer and get an MBA from an IIM, Indian Institute of Technology and Indian Institute of Management. And he has both of them. So he says, when I got this, I did my engineering and then got my MBA from one of the top management institutes in India. And then I thought to myself, what should I do in life? I couldn't decide. And he tells this to young people who asked him, how did you decide this great goal in life? He said, I didn't. Then what did you do? He said, I thought, what should I do? And I couldn't find out what I'll do with my life. Then I started thinking, what should I not do? What is it that I don't want to do? So I looked around, my friends were all going into these high-paying multinational jobs. I think many of them must be here in Manhattan now, in Wall Street. So do I want to do that? Not particularly. Then I looked at my professors. They were academicians. So do I want to do that? He was a brilliant student. I said, no, even that doesn't motivate me. Then he said, I saw outside, there's a place called Joka where IIM Calcutta is there. Outside, street children. I said, they need me now. Right now, these are the kids who need help. I'm going to do something for them. And what does he do? He says, he gave very nice teaching, and he's very inspired by Vivekananda. Everything for him comes from Vivekananda, reading Vivekananda. And he read Vivekananda, it is love that counts. It's the heart that counts, not the head. So he doesn't start with a plan that I'm going to make an orphanage for 5,000 kids. No. He said, there's 3 kids. I picked them up from the street. I rented an apartment, took them there and started caring for them, feeding them, taking care of them, teaching them. Money, in India it's a big business, tuition, like teaching the kids of rich people or not so rich people. They pay good money. And here is this young man who is brilliant, who has an IIT degree, an IIM degree, so everybody makes a beeline to him. I said, all right, 3 kids is fine, but now you have 5,000 kids. How are you going to raise money for 5,000 kids? He said, now I don't even try. Money comes exactly like Vivekananda said. Money will drop from the heavens. Money will come by itself. That heart must be there. So this is like, so Akhandananda started this model. in those days. Seeing God in everybody, it was deep inside, it was not a disruption. He was centered in God, he was centered in this divinity within, and when he, whether wandering in the Himalayas or engaged in the service of those little children, for him internally, however, he was still centered in Brahman. With eyes closed, with eyes open, he sees the same reality everywhere. So Sargachi developed, and even now, it's still a little bit remote, but it's a very well developed ashram. Those who have visited, I don't know, some of you must have visited. I have visited a few times. And it's pretty impressive to see the work that's being done there. Still a pretty poor area, of course, much, much better than what it was in those days. Akhandananda spent years there. You know, the description of him. He takes off his orange, the gerua robes, ochre robes, puts on a knee-length pair of trousers, and a shirt, and ties a handkerchief around his head. I think, is the picture there? No. So he ties it around his head and goes and plows the fields like the farmers. Agriculture. And he eats the food which the poor farmers there would eat. Swami Ranganathanandaji, who was the 13th president of order whom I mentioned, he told us how he met Swami Akhandananda. So he had come from the south of India to the main monastery, and he knew that Swami Akhandananda, a direct disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, lived in Sargachi in Murshidabad. So he traveled. In those days, a difficult journey. After a long and difficult journey, this young man was a brahmachari. I think he was already a monk or a brahmachari at that time. He reaches the ashram, tired, hungry. And Akhandanji sees him and tells him, "Oh, we haven't finished ploughing the field. Go and finish ploughing the field. You have come, very good. Go and plough the field." And this is the caliber of Swami Ranganathananda. You know, he just bowed down once and he went. He yoked the bullocks and he finished ploughing the fields. And I don't know, I would be scared of the bullocks. I wouldn't even know how to do that. But he did it at the point of exhaustion. He comes back again, sweating, hungry, completely exhausted, bows down to Swami Akhandananda. Swami Akhandananda blesses him wholeheartedly, with all his heart, and says, Saraswati will dwell on your tongue. And like the goddess of learning will dwell in you. That's what happened really. For the rest of his life, Swami Ranganathanji, over 60 countries he traveled and spread Vedanta. He was an ambassador of Vedanta for the whole world. He really appreciated what was good and great in him. It is a sign of a great person. You appreciate the greatness in others. Josephine MacLeod, a disciple of, not disciple, she would never call herself a disciple of Swami Vivekananda. She would say, I am his friend. So she said that I have met many great people in my time. She moved in high society in the late 19th and early 20th century in United States and in Europe. For example, she says, I met the Tsar of Russia, not the one now, the Tsar of Russia, and I was awed. I thought how great he is and how insignificant I am. But when I met Swami Vivekananda, I felt how great he is and how great I am. That's the characteristic which Akhandananda also shared. He appreciated the greatness in others. Swami Vivekananda says, true humility does not consist in being a doormat. And like people dominate you, or they exploit you, or they ride roughshod over you. No. True humility does not consist in being a doormat. True humility is seeing the greatness in the other person. And Akhandananda, he admired, and you see the list of people he admired, read, Booker T. Washington here in the United States, Florence Nightingale, Garibaldi and Mazzini in Italy, then Mahatma Gandhi, and then Chittaranjan Das, the great national leaders at that time in India. I think he met Mahatma Gandhi also, I'm not very sure. So in 1934, when Swami Shivanandaji passed on, Swami Akhandananda was made the president of the Ramakrishna order. And the rule is that the president, or the tradition is the president of the Ramakrishna order stays in the main monastery in Belur Math. Swami Akhandananda, he refused to stay there. He became the president and he went straight back to his beloved orphanage in the little village. And that's where he stayed. He would visit Belur Math once in a while, but he stayed there. There are so many descriptions. He was, by the way, if it sounds all very glorious, it wasn't. He was exceptionally difficult to get along with. Not because of anything else. The kind of life he led, it was exhausting for anybody else who was not at that high spiritual plane. There was no fixed time for sleep or food, any of the little luxuries of life. Nothing. The bare minimum in the ashram, and all the time it was work and intense hardship. And so many of the monks who went to work with him, they couldn't stay, they ran away. So when he would come to the main monastery, give me a monk, and I'm short-handed. Swami Sarvapriyananda, who was the general secretary of the order, he was a very calm and cool person. He knew both sides of the story. He knew Akhandananda was a great person and was doing great work. But he also knew these young monks won't be able to take it. So he would, work in different ways to protect the younger monks. He would say that, this monk, you want to take him? Swami Akhandananda said, yes, I like this young man. He can do good work. Send him with me. And Swami Sarvapriyananda would say, yeah, you can take him. He'll be good for you, for the ashram. He can go with you. But he's a city boy. What does that mean? Well, Bengali. So he likes luchi at night. You have to feed him luchi at night. And Akhandananda says, are you serious? In Sargachi, that poor place, everybody is so desperately poor. Nobody has time for this kind of nonsense and luxury. Where will I get luchi to feed him? You keep your monk. I don't want him. And so he was saved. And most of all, Swami Bhuteshanandaji, who became the 12th president of the order, and I was fortunate enough to get mantra diksha from him. He was protected because he was a young monk. Swami Akhandananda came and saw him and liked him. I like him. Give him to me to go to Sargachi. And Swami Sarvapriyananda said, yes, you can take him. He'll be good for the ashram. He's a good young man. But another but. Akhandananda, you can imagine him going, what's it this time? Luchis again? He said, no. He likes studying Vedanta. This Swami Bhuteshananda. So he loves Vedanta. And you are an enlightened person, a Brahmagyani. It'll be very fortunate for this young man if he studies Vedanta. You have to teach him Vedanta daily. And Akhandananda was like, are you serious? I have no time at all. There's so much work. Where will I get time to teach him? No. He can stay here. That was so nice because, I'm the direct beneficiary of the Swami Bhuteshananda being saved at that time from. Because if he had run away, he wouldn't have, I'm sure, but if he had run away, then I wouldn't be here also today. People around in that village, they didn't know much about spirituality. They were mostly Muslims and poor farmers and desperately making a living, but they loved him. Even now, so they used to call him Baba, which means father. Even now, if you go to that ashram, the people in the villages, they call it Baba's ashram, ashram of Baba. He wrote in big letters on top of the ashram, Jai Shri Ramakrishna. Somebody asked him, what's the point? Why are you writing? Who will read this? What's the point of writing in such big letters? He says, people who pass by, they will read it. And just reading that, the name which goes into their minds, they're repeating that once. He says, Bhuvana Mangalo. That means it's auspicious for the world, even to repeat the name of Sri Ramakrishna. Although he loved Sargachi, but he said he wanted to die in Belur Math, the main monastery. He would visit Belur Math once in a while, and this was the occasion of fun because the younger brahmacharis would all make fun. They had a great time with him because he was very funny too. For example, once he came to Belur Math, actually to Udbodhan, where Swami Sarvapriyananda was there, and the young monks surrounded him. He said, give us money because we want money to eat sweets. And he said, what do you mean? You are monks. Aren't you ashamed of yourselves begging for money to eat sweets? And I don't have any money. Where will I get money? They knew he used to keep money folded up in the... that's the old... I've seen old monks do that also, elderly monks. So since you don't have a pocket, I have a pocket, but in those days, they would just wear a cloth. And so they would keep money folded up in the cloth here. I don't recommend it. And there was a time when I didn't have a shirt. I was in the Himalayas. I was just wearing this cloth and a warm shawl around myself. So somebody gave me money, 20 rupees. It's a custom to give money to monks. I had nowhere to put it. So I knew this was the technique that the old monks used. So I put it inside. But I'm not used to it. So later in the night when I went to my cottage, in the dead of the night, I looked for the money. It had dropped out somewhere. And where would I go to find it? Because it was terribly cold and pitch dark outside. The Ganga roaring by, mountains and glaciers all around. And the only thing I could think of was not God, the 20 rupees which was missing. I thought, where did it go? So anyway, Swami Akhandananda used to keep the money there, and the young monks knew that. So they grabbed hold of his cloth and they were trying to pull the money out. And Swami Akhandananda got annoyed, and he told Swami Sarvapriyananda, what kind of training have you given these youngsters? They're monks and they're trying to rob me of my money. But it's all in fun because he had actually got that money to give sweets to the monks. I remember a similar instance. Swami Bhuteshanandaji, whom I mentioned, he was the 12th president of the order. This was when Swami Bhuteshanandaji was around 97 years old. And we were all youngsters, monks. We would go to him every day. And we did exactly the same thing once. We didn't try to snatch money from his cloth, but the monks said, so Bhuteshanandaji was a little hard of hearing, and 97, But a wonderful discussion on Vedanta would go on. He had lifelong love for Vedanta, so a wonderful discussion on Vedanta would go on. But there was a lot of fun also. One day the monks, I still remember, I was there, they picked up a chorus, give us money, we want to buy mangoes, we want to eat mangoes, it's mango season. And Bhuteshanandaji was perfectly, they was carrying on a conversation till that point. He says, what are you saying? Mangoes, Swami, money. What are they saying? And the monks said, no, Swami, you were hearing us perfectly well. Now you can't hear. And then one of the assistant monks comes and, speaks loudly into his ear. Swami, they want money to buy mangoes. Oh. And then he looked at us and he says, you can leave now. Go. But he did give us money for mangoes later on. It was a lot of fun. And when he came to Belur Math, he would be in a hurry to go back to his beloved orphanage in Shargachi. And he really loved those children. There's a description of when one of his beloved orphans would die. In those days, it was very difficult, diseases and all. He wept bitterly, any mother would weep for a child lost. And imagine, he's a monk who's an enlightened person. Anyway, so when he would come to the main monastery, he would be eager to go back, and the monks would try all sorts of ways to keep him in the main monastery a few days longer. So Swami Brahmananda, who was the president, who was a very humorous person himself. Swami Akhandananda has come to visit, and Swami Brahmananda is there, and the day comes, in spite of all appeals, Akhandananda says, no, I will go back to Sargachi. I will not stay here anymore. So train ticket has been purchased. That night he's supposed to go to the station for the train which will take him to Shargachi. Actually Baharampur, that station, and then from there to Shargachi. Swami Brahmananda has arranged. Now in those days, it's called a palki. A palanquin? It's not very helpful. It's like a box. You get into a box, and there are people who will carry you. The box from outside. There are 4 people, 2 on the front and 2 at the back. They lift it up and they carry you. So it's women, and then rich people, elderly people, zamindars, and it's not for everybody. If you're very poor, you got to carry. You didn't get to sit in the palanquin. So they got a palanquin for the Swami, Akhandanandaji. And so he went and sat there, and all the other monks gathered around, and they saw him. It's a tradition in our monasteries. You see off a person who's going on a journey. They saw him off. Now Swami Brahmananda had instructed the palanquin bearers to go round and round the monastery grounds, not to the station. And so they went round and round. It's dark. And so you can't see anything. Even if Akhandanandaji wants to peep outside, just sees dark, nothing, forest. It's going round and round, and after a certain time, he sets it down. So Akhandanandaji comes out and he finds Swami Brahmananda standing and all the monks standing there like this. It's too late. He has missed the train. So he had to stay. Another time, this time Swami Shivananda, Brahmananda passed away in 1922. Swami Shivananda was the president of the order. And Swami Akhandananda has come on one of his brief visits to the main monastery. And he's the beloved younger brother of Shivananda. Shivananda, at that time, Akhandananda was the vice president, and Swami Shivananda was the president of the whole order. Let's see how childlike they were. Swami Shivananda is sitting in his room. In the next room, Swami Akhandananda, it's late in the night, time to go to sleep. And a young monk has been deputed to serve Swami Akhandananda, to be with him at night, even in case if this venerable old Swami needs anything. And Swami Akhandananda saw the young monk who's there on the carpet below the bed. He goes to sleep. And he's alarmed. And then he bangs on the door of Swami Shivananda in the dead of the night. And Swami Shivananda, the president of the order, very elderly, gets up and says, "What's wrong?" And Swami Akhandananda says, Look at this young monk. He's sleeping at night. He's come to realize God. Tell me, brother, did we ever sleep in the night when we were at his age? Did we not spend our nights in meditation? How will he realize God if he sleeps at night? But you can imagine the poor young monk. He must have gone red with embarrassment from head to toe. And Swami Shivananda, in affectionately, said, "Oh, he'll take a little longer, but he'll get there. Don't worry. And Akhandananda shakes his head and he says, "Sleeping at night, I never heard of such a thing." So, 1937 was already the president of the order. In fact, 1936 was the centenary of Sri Ramakrishna's birth, and it was a worldwide celebration, especially in India. And as the president of the order, the celebration committee asked him to give a message which would be published. And Swami Akhandananda, who was in Sargachi, in the orphanage there, he wrote back saying that Sri Ramakrishna is Atman, Brahman, is ageless. What is a birthday and what's a centenary? There's no such thing as a centenary for Sri Ramakrishna. And you can imagine the whole celebration committee rolling their eyes. And then it took a vision from Sri Ramakrishna to Akhandanandaji, telling him, do write that message for them. So Akhandanandaji writes a beautiful message blessing the celebrations. It was done here also, 1936. There is a rare photograph up in the library of the 1936 celebrations in the Vedanta Society of New York in 1936. There is a restaurant. It's the first Indian restaurant in the United States, certainly in New York. It's called the Indo-Ceylon restaurant in those days. It still exists. Robert went there. And there is a picture which was taken of a dinner organized for all the members of the Vedanta Society in those days. And Swami Bodhanandaji was there and all the other members, you can see that. And the people in the restaurant did not know of this heritage. So they asked for a copy of the picture and Robert actually took a copy and gave them. So that was done, the centenary 1936. His health was failing. He still stayed on in that remote area where there's no care. But he wanted to die in Belur Math. And that was somehow fulfilled because in 1937, in February, he was so ill. For his treatment, I think, 2 monks were sent from Belur Math to escort him to Belur Math, to Calcutta. And they took him in a stretcher. It was so poignant because those poor people, they surrounded him, the stretcher, and they said, "Baba, come back to us quick." And he goes in a train, he goes to Calcutta. By the time the train reaches Calcutta, he's in a coma. And so they take him to Belur Math, first to Udbodhan, then to Belur Math. On 7th February in the morning, in 1937, Swami Akhandanandaji passed away. His beautiful message, Swami Chaitanandaji summarizes that, and he says, beautiful message of Swami Akhandanandaji: expand yourself, see yourself in all beings and include everybody else in yourself. This is the way, the straight and direct way to Brahma Jnana, enlightenment. You will see one Brahman everywhere and much more easily, much more directly in this way. I pray to Sri Ramakrishna, the Holy Mother Sharada Devi, Swami Vivekananda, Akhandanandaji, and the Divine Mother Durga, who's coming, Durga Puja next week, to bless us all. May we have devotion and love, especially love, human love for everybody and the divine love for God at the feet of the Lord. In this very life itself, make our lives blessed and make our lives a blessing for everybody else around us. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Do see that little video, Google it on YouTube. Swami Akhandananda. There are other Swami Akhandanandas also, so don't be misled. It's not a high definition video, color video. It's a very jerky black and white clip, about 5 seconds long. But you do